It's been a long 3 days. We left home probably at least 4 or 5 days for some of us. We came a long way. We've had several sleepless nights or partially sleepless nights. I think this is the time as we examine this meeting and as we examine the rethinking that we actually do this analysis why we're here. If we're talking about rethinking, we really need to go beyond the specifics of our discussion. Rethinking means looking anew. And if we start to do that, I think we have to do it from a perspective. I'm going to do it a bit from my own personal perspective. I came here because I was fascinated by this interaction. My training has been on health and on nutrition. I know much less about agriculture. But without having the full knowledge base, I think we all can reflect on how should this be happening. Clearly, the discussion of the last 3 or 4 days proves that the way it's proceeding is clearly insufficient. And in a way, the invitation is to think again. How would we consider this should be done? How can we make it better? And in attempting to do this, we have to examine, though, the changes in the world we live in. And I think in that sense, the food system, agricultural system, and nutritional issues that we have discussed have been framed in a world that was framed in many ways several decades ago. We're still doing that mode of action. And obviously, that mode of action was based, and it still is in our minds, on the Malthusian dogma or the Malthusian issue that we would not be able to produce enough food. I think in this, under the present day, although we do have malnutrition and we do have situations that are extreme, we can say that we produce more food per capita than we ever did before, and that has continued to rise. So that's an important point in this background. At the same time, food is not only food, it's not only a commodity. Food is responding to a basic human need. So if we treat it with the laws of the economics of basic commodities, we're going to get it wrong. We have to think that we're meeting a basic human need, as if we were meeting a basic human need in regulating access to air or access to water. So in that dimension, we have to separate that here we're talking not about just any other commodity as if we were producing tin, copper, or iron. Here we're producing something for humanity as such. And I think we have to examine this with also a set of basic principles and how they have been shaped. We're living in a world where we have CNN, where we have on television anything that happens any place around the world. We're all living what happened in Egypt now and what happened a couple of months ago, something else in the rest of the world. With the perspective of Latin America, I can say that hunger has been in the discussion of the politics of the region for the last 20, 30 years. And that probably explains why there's been a social demand that gets Lula elected. Lula was elected with the promise of providing food. Evo Morales took power for the first time, an indigenous person in Bolivia, where 95% of the people are indigenous. Before, all the presidents had been, although born locally, they belonged to the very small elite. So we're seeing a change, and the first thing he says, I'm going to propose malnutrition zero for the people. So we cannot see it outside this context. The policies are shaped by the politics, and the politics can be changed in various ways. We're seeing a progressive rise of democracy at the base. And this is good because the solution to the problems is going to come when people demand access to food as a basic human right. Not that we write it in the UN Charter or that we debate the rights approach. It will be based on a demand for food. And everywhere this has happened, governments have actually either toppled or have had to respond to that. And basically, I think we have to keep this in this dimension as we rethink how we're going to get at this interaction. And in this sense, this is the time that we imagine how can agriculture, nutrition, and food work better. But basically, we need a change in paradigm. More of the same, from all the research I've heard, from all of the ideas I've heard, we're not going to get this solved by doing more of the same. And in this rethinking, it cannot be based on what's doable. It needs to be based on what needs to be done. And it needs to be based on doing whatever it takes to make what's needed doable. And that's very different from saying, let's do what can be done. We will not find solutions in this interaction unless we challenge ourselves and the system in saying what needs to be done, and then rethink, and then redefine, and then establish that basic new paradigm. And I think until we change the type of thinking or type of rethinking, we're not going to be able to reimagine. In fact, I look at the dictionary and there's no reimagination. You either imagine or rethink, but reimagination is something we wish we could. So I would like to bring us down to earth. And when we do this rethinking, I would like to see that we examine the failures of the system, where the things are failing, and ask ourselves, what if? And I'd like to propose a few what ifs. What if we stop, let's say, we've obviously discussed the malthus, and we all know that we're putting a lot of the food into animals. That's not intrinsically wrong. What's intrinsically wrong is that out of the food supply and the flesh foods that we produce, which is on average, putting it all together, about 120 grams per person in this universe, most, 80% are getting 20 grams, and most, very few others, are getting 150 and some up to 200 grams. And basically, if we're going to take it from a standpoint of a human need, flesh foods are most needed by young children. The rest can do very well, as India and lots of Asia have proven, can be doing very well with minimal amounts of animal foods. And obviously, we can feed many more people if we depend on plant diets. I didn't say this. This was Einstein, among his many statements, proposed that we should make a big shift in our diets and propose that we should go in plant-based diets. Doesn't mean that we're going to use this as a religious dogma, but in fact, it's a very important tenet, and unless we start doing some of that, we're obviously going to run into problems. And if we look at countries that are doing not this, but are putting the price of meat according to the real price and not based on subsidized cereals that are fed to animals, in fact, those countries have the case of Japan, has the longest life expectancy, it has a very clean environment, it has the lowest obesity rates, and in fact, it doesn't need to be tested again. People can live with much less animal foods. What if...
Ricardo, we need to wrap up.
Okay, I'll give you a few other what if.
I'll give you a chance to come back and make more comments.
I'll give you maybe a couple more, and then I'll come back.
Oh, no, I'll give you a chance for more comments.
Okay. What if we start to redefine hunger and malnutrition and base it not only on available energy, as we map the world as a hunger map, but include nutritional quality and lifelong health into food security? What if we measure the growth of children not based on weight, but based on length, which is the index of productivity and lifelong health? Those are very simple things that require rethinking in many other ways. I'll have a few others.
I'll give you a chance to come back. I'll give you a chance. Now, you raised, all three of the panelists have raised very interesting and very provocative points. I will give our panelists, not channelists, a chance to make last comments. But I do also want to pick up on the theme of Denise and go to some people in the audience to have a little bit of perspective from their side. I have John Parker here from The Economist. And John, I would be very interested from the perspective of a media person. Are we rethinking, reimagining in new ways, or are we back to same old thinking?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, to be honest. I think we're sort of agonizing around a lot of really hard problems. And the way I think about this is, the reason it's so difficult is that, food, because it's so basic to life, food is about many, many things. We've been talking about, food contributes to nutrition. It's the basis for health. And just occasionally, we've been talking about, food is a basic contributor to economic growth and jobs. But the thing that always strikes me is that food is also a sort of a source of comfort for people. It's a source of sort of family celebration. It's a source of culture. And this aspect of food seems to me incredibly important. And the last panelist gave some great quotes. And I just recently came across one which is relevant to all this. It's so much more eloquent than anything I could say. I'm going to just read it to you. This is George Orwell on the English working class in the 1930s. And it's in the Road to Wigan Pier. And he's talking about what they ate. The basis of their diet is white bread and margarine, corned beef, sugared tea, and potatoes. An appalling diet. Would it not be better if they spent more money on wholesome things, like oranges and wholemeal bread, or if they ate their carrots raw? Yes, it would, but the point is no human being would ever do such a thing. The ordinary human being would sooner starve than live on brown bread and raw carrots. And the peculiar evil is this, that the less money you have, the less you're inclined to spend it on wholesome food. A millionaire may enjoy breakfasting off orange juice and Ryvita biscuits. An unemployed man does not. And I love that quote because, it gives us a sort of a warning, in terms of reimagining things. I imagine this from the sort of the point of view of, well, not the British working class of the 1930s, but the, 2 million, 5 million people living in poor or middle-income countries. The first thing they do, if they get a bit more money, is not necessarily to do all these very good things that nutritionists want them to do. They don't necessarily go out and buy a much better diet. And we know this, actually. There's economic evidence for this. The JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab studies of, what poor families do with a little bit of extra money says that they're just as likely to buy a mobile phone if they've got $20 than buy, some sort of wholesome lentils. But the interesting thing for me is that that's not the whole picture. We've talked a bit about the Bolsa Familia program. There, where people get a bit of extra money through the Bolsa Familia program, they spend 70% of the money on extra food. And for me, one of the interesting things is, why do so many people, spend extra money on nutrition, and why do other people in other circumstances spend, hardly any? And this, I would explain it in this sort of cultural way. The family that decides on the mobile phone is sort of, they have nothing. If they get a little bit of extra money, a mobile phone or a non-food thing might well be like an investment in their future, whereas nutrition would be like, it would be just consumption. And if you have nothing and you're liable, to find that the harvest will fail next year, it's actually better to do like a capital investment than to eat it.
Thank you, John. Thank you. You raised cultural issues, you raised choice issues. Why do people make choices the way they do? And you raised social media issues. I'm going to turn around and ask the mic to be given to Adelaida, who also comes with a social media perspective, NGO perspective, and a Latin American perspective.
Hi. Oops. No, to stand up. Hello, my name is Adelaida from Colombia, and I've come to participate in a panel on communication that was coordinated by Klaus from IFPRI and Warren Feek, and kindly asked by Rajul to comment. I think from our perspective in the media, communication, TV, behavior, social change communication, what I think would be really interesting for our next conference would be to address the issue of communication at the center, media, communication, advocacy, participatory mobilization, social networks. I think that we discussed it in the previous panel with the Latin American participants, which is at the center of all this is a need to share knowledge and sustain platforms throughout these conferences, keep communicating amongst decision makers, but also facilitate the three sectors sharing knowledge amongst the key audiences. I've been also talking about in the first session about the use of, in the case of Brazil, for example, this dialogue, permanent dialogue with civil society organizations, social movements in the decision-making processes of policies in these three areas have been key for the success, including Bolsa Familia's success. And the way that they've partnered up with private media, such as Globo, the Futura channel, and the network of public TV channels in Brazil linked to outreach programs in the school system and hospitals, etc., has been absolutely crucial in getting a whole dialogue. So I guess the key issues I think that what was missing in this last panel is this idea of communication, participatory processes, dialogue from the bottom, horizontal linkages, and to tap on the new social media and youth as social actors, and the school system also as a change space.